subscribe to get daily Manchester United content from passionate Reds, only on All for United.
Hello and welcome back to All for United. A bit of a different sort of show today. As you can see, I've got a very, very special panel of guests lined up for you. Obviously, no fixtures. It's international break now. Everyone's favourite time of the year. There's two pointless fixtures other than the qualifiers that everyone plays that, you know, no one really sees the point in. But Phil, Stu, Abdul, hope you guys are all well. We're going to do a show talking about sort of partly how to save our season and partly how to save our near future, because it's a question that's going to be coming up a lot. A big decision needs to be made very soon about the next manager. And I think that decision could go a long way to shaping how United look in the next couple of years. So we'll start off, as the title suggests, how to save our season. Stu, I'll come to you first. Obviously, top four looks a long shot now. You know, Arsenal, with a game in hand, already 4 points ahead of us. I'll ask you a question. It's one thing saying, how do we save our season? Is it even possible from this point to get top four?
Well, look, I mean, is top four season saving? Nope, nothing season saving unless you win the title. And you can't be playing for top four. Any professional footballer worth his salt won't have anything to do with wanting to play for top four. I mean, look, you could have a pop at Pogba for what he's come out and said. I'm not his biggest fan, as we all know, but he speaks a lot of sense. You know, we haven't done anything since he's been back in 5 years. Mm-hmm. You forget what's under the skirt of what he's saying, but, you know, essentially what he's saying is true. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. But ultimately, as I've always said, you know, player responsibility is the biggest thing. It's the biggest key. And we just don't have those players who are willing to, you know, fight and scratch and win a game of football. We haven't had that type of player for such a long time. The types of players that are coming in, that they may be talented, they may be big names, they may have achieved stuff, they may have won, you know, World Cups, they may have won European Championships, but a lot of those players that have come in have had players in and around their squads and in and around their first 11 that are willing to go that extra yard to win a game of football. And we haven't had that for such a long time. We've lost that real makeup and mentality of bad winners. I talk about it a lot, as you guys know. You know, we don't have any bad losers on our team, let alone bad winners. So there's never any kind of talk about what's gone wrong. You very rarely see players shouting and screaming and pointing. You do see it, but not often enough. You don't see everything that you need to see. I'm not seeing it. You know, I always look at football from my own eyes, what it's like if I was on that pitch, and I'm not seeing any risk takers out there. So I don't think it's a question of whether our season can be saved or whether our season can be salvaged. We shouldn't be in this position in the first place. And the only reason we are is, you could talk about managers, you can talk about coaches, but it's player application, it's player want, it's player will. And we haven't had that for such a long time, James. And I know we'll get on to who we think is coming in, and whoever comes in has got to bring a mentality that is far, far, far way ahead of what the likes of Mourinho's bought, what the likes of Van Haller's bought, what the likes of Ollie's bought, and so forth. And so that, to me, is the key, is the mentality side.
Absolutely, I'd agree with you. I think I'll come to you, Abdul, because obviously those Pogba quotes from, I think it was yesterday, quite poignant at the minute with a lot of discontent that's going on within the club. Obviously, his performances, compared to the player that we know he can be, haven't been great for United. But then you look at what he's actually said. He said, you know, at France, I have a role. Deschamps has given me a role that I play, that I fit. And at United, I don't think I've ever had a set role. Do you think that summarises the club in general, the fact that we have players like Pogba, like, you know, a Rashford, a Martial, and we just don't really know what to do with them or how to fit them in entirely?
Yeah, I think what he said really ties into what I have been saying, and people don't agree with me, maybe because I look at it from a more tactical point of view than a psychological confidence and aggression and all that. I look at it as, we bought these players who serve their different purposes and different styles, but we've never actually thought or given a thought process to how all these players fit together, right? Look, the closest thing that Pogba had of a midfield that functions well with him was Andre Herrera and Matic. That's the closest thing he's had. And during that time, when Herrera was giving a role in the team and a long run-in with Matic, which is Ollie's interim period, Pogba had his best spell at United in terms of chance creation, in terms of goals, in terms of assists. Now, if you fast forward that to the lockdown period where Matic was somehow rejuvenated a little bit again with Pogba and Bruno Fernandes, that drone role, fitted a lot what he used to do for France. So also in that period, Pogba was doing really good. He wasn't getting the goals and the assists, but he was helping us a lot in progression and breaking those first two lines. So from my point of view, it has to do more with United's overall recruitment strategies over the last few years. That's why they haven't been successful. That's why they're almost at the edge of, or almost there, or nearly there, or they fail at the last hurdle. Yes, I absolutely agree with everybody when they say that, oh, but there's this wanting it more, this, confidence, this aggression. Yes, that needs to exist in the game. You have to be a winner. But I don't think that all of the players that we've bought were losers. There are winners in this team, and pretty much big winners. They didn't just come to United and all of a sudden became losers. It's just that they don't all fit together. So the things that Pogba is good at, when he tries to do them, he doesn't find the people that are good to receive them, or the people that fit to receiving the things that he offers, or the things that Pogba lacks, he doesn't find the people that can actually cover his ass for it. You know what I mean? So it's the same with pretty much every player we have. Not every player, but a lot of them, And I think this is essentially Man United's biggest issue. Once the team fits well together, they'll grow together. They'll grow in confidence together. You'll see the aggression. You'll see the wanting it more. They see all that stuff. But at the moment, I just see it it's based on results. The attitude and the comments that we say about the players is oh, they don't care, and all that stuff. Yes, some of them probably don't, because of how the club have been functioning for years. Some of them I'm pretty sure they don't anymore, but not all of them were like that. We didn't buy them like that. What's wrong with us as a club that's making them to be like that? So that's my issue.
Yeah,
hard to disagree with much of what Abdel was saying there, actually. Stu as well. I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if United didn't qualify for the Champions League. One of the benefits of the Europa League is that you get to use young players. You get to use some of the players that are on the fringes. And realistically, United haven't been at a level in the Champions League where they would beat a good team since Ferguson left. I mean, you go back to Bayern Munich under Moyes. I remember when Evra scored away from home, I was stunned because I think it was shortly after Olympiacos. And so they haven't been good enough. People talk about them winning the Champions League this season. United will lose to any really good team, right? Because there's just too many problems. So if they qualify for the Europa League next season and use that as an opportunity to play Garnacho, to play Mabry and other players that are on the fringes, maybe James Garner, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. Secondly, I think when we look at some of the differences between United, Liverpool, City, one of the problems is Liverpool and City are fixated on a goal of winning the Premier League, right? Manchester United players are fixated on winning the next game. And so when they lose and they win the next game, then everything's all right. Because they don't believe that they can win a Premier League. They don't believe that they can win a European Cup. So their goals are totally different. They're short term. Everything at Liverpool and City's built around winning the Premier League, winning the Champions League. Everything at Manchester United is about winning the next game, right? And so you have that problem. We always talk about the Champions League being a springboard, but the Europa League is actually more akin to United's level. And I think that there needs to be some realism here that United are not winning the league anytime soon, not this year or next year. So the other problem is for me, and Abdel touched on it here, United have a mishmash of players that were bought for different managers with very different ideologies. one thing that I do like about Ten Hag and Pochettino is they're similar to Rangnick in how he wants to play. But Rangnick hasn't brought any players in, and most of the players at United are not suited to the way Rangnick wants to play. I mean, you've got a Southampton manager coming out talking about United players cheating between the lines. That is a disgrace. I mean, they should be so embarrassed at that, right? But they aren't. And so you see a lot of this when United concede a goal or face adversity, right? So in the parts of the game where you need desire, where you need things that are intangibles, which you always need second half, right? Whenever you're relying on desire and everything else, you see United drop off. But as soon as they concede a goal, they almost always concede a second one. You saw it against Leeds. You saw it against Villa. By the way, they're conceding the same goal against Leeds that they were conceding against Atletico Madrid. So I'm at the back post tapping it in because the fullbacks are too narrow, not watching what's coming over their shoulder, right? So, and you see what happens when they start going behind. It's not my fault. It's his fault. It's their fault. It's his fault. And this is what happens when you have individual players managed as PR brands who are constantly told, whatever you do, you don't take the blame for anything negative. You disperse that blame. You take all the credit for things that are positive, but not negative, because that's what brand management does. And this is unfortunately how United treat players. I mean, Richard Arnold's on record saying this. We have 26 George Clooney's. That tells you how Manchester United see their players. They don't see them as footballers. They see them as individual brands to be monetized. How on earth can you ever get a collective atmosphere in a dressing room focused on one goal that's not about the individual goal? We say United are an individual team. Gee, I wonder why, right? Because it's always down to some individual to produce a bit of magic. It's always down to some individual to grab the game by the scruff of the neck or more motive. It's never down to 7 or 8 players. You can't win in that environment. This starts from the top down because the football club, winning football matches is not the most important thing to this football club. And until that becomes the most important thing to United, honestly, I don't feel that a manager can come in and have serious change, because I think if you ask somebody to build a house for you and say, build it on the ocean, I will never give you stability. First responsibility of Manchester United to any manager is to give them a foundation to build on. And that doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's hard to follow up on that, really. I think we just end the show there. It was a perfect summation of every problem we have. But still, I want to bring it back to this season. I want to pick up on something that Phil said specifically. It was about bedding in these youngsters, using the Europa League as that for next season, should we qualify for that. Would you take it sort of even more recent? Would you look at the fact how to save our season? Would you look at that a completely different way, whether Champions League, qualifying for Champions League wouldn't save our season, but bedding in some of these young players who need game time, who are desperate to play, getting them some experience in games that really don't matter at this point would be more of benefit to United than going all out to try and qualify for a Champions League that we're not really going to win anyway.
Yeah, well, Phil makes a good point. I mean, he's old school anyway, Phillies. He's like myself. You know, he was probably around like me when the proper reserve league was about, and that's how you used to bed players in the reserve league. You can't do that in the under-23s. We've had a variety of conversations about this. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've always brought up is their strength and their stamina. They're not quite big enough yet to play Premier League football. Having said that, then the counter argument is always going to be, how do you know until you try? It's always the same in everything in life. How do you know until you actually try? And I think there's a pathway for the likes of Medjbury to come in. I think there's a pathway for, I like Hernandez, actually. I think he's a brilliant fullback. He wants to cut his hair, mind you, but I think as a player, he's excellent. Shola Surety, I think he's just a bit too lightweight for me. He's a wonderful talent. Iqbal, wonderful talent. Charlie Savage looks like he's got something about him, a lot more. I would say completely different to his dad, really. His dad was just, a little bit like me, a bit of an enforcer, where he's a bit more cultured as a player. So we do have these players that can come into the first team and probably match what we're seeing. And that's the key thing here, is these players will actually match our current first teamers. And that's quite sad. Phil mentioned James Garner. I think he's been brilliant for Forest this year. Little Jimmy Garner has been absolutely brilliant for Forest. I'd love to see him brought back and have a chance, but it's not going to happen because Forest are fighting for playoffs in the Championship. So the biggest problem for me is what happens if these players come back or get put into the first team, get sit on the bench and don't actually get that chance. And if they do get that chance, how are we helping them mentally if it doesn't go quite according to plan? And that's also a thing that you've got to consider with young players. But we've had plenty of young players. Langa's come in. There's ums and ahs. He's been pretty good in some games. He's been a ghost in other games, but you expect that for a young player. It's how these guys deal with it. Now, for me, you've got to want. You have to want. You've got to be knocking on at Raniak's door. Give me a shot. Give me a shot. Let me do something. Do your extra training. Do everything you can to put yourself focused in front of Raniak. But I wouldn't disagree, and I wouldn't argue against giving these guys a chance. And I think Phil's right, actually. Although Europa League isn't good enough for Manchester United as a team, as an entity, it is a really good standing ground for young players. And it is our level, whether we like it or not. Champions League isn't our level. The Europa League is. And we've proven that in the past where we've got to finals, semi-finals, etc. So I think you've got to look at it. I don't disagree. I think we should bring these players in, but you've got to nurture them properly. I'm not so sure we've got the infrastructure to nurture these guys. That's my only worry.
Well, I'll come to you, Abdul. I'll take this down a slightly different route because obviously we're going to move on to Ten Hag after your answer to this. But, the thing that United have struggled with previously is future planning. So do you think, given that it feels like the rest of this season is a bit of a write-off, if Ranić knows who the next manager will be, which it almost feels like he already does, would it be worth using the rest of this season for him to try and sort of adapt the players that we already have and some of the youngsters as well into a system that would better suit the new manager coming in? Because we've seen Ranić try and implement his own style. It's worked to an extent. I don't think the players are fully on board with it. I don't think they can fully get their heads around it. But would it be worthwhile trying to set these players up in that sort of shape, get them sort of ready for the next season so it's not a complete shock? And if so, how do you do that with these players? Take a Ten Hag, for example. How do you get these players to sort of emulate Ten Hag style?
I think the good thing, your question ties with something that I wanted to highlight. I think Phil mentioned it earlier about Hasenhüttl saying that the players are cheating. The thing is, when he said that, he said it in reference to how when we press, our players open the door for other teams to play through the midfield by not pressing in the right way. And that's because of the
said, by the way, too.
Yeah, and Brendan Rodgers said it too. And it's because of the combination of forward players we were putting out at that time. Specifically, the Leicester game, I remember it was Greenwood, and I think it was Cristiano and Sancho at the time. And I was banging my head about playing Greenwood and Cristiano at the same time, behind them Bruno Fernandes, because Bruno Fernandes wants to press. These two don't want to press or don't know how to press, right? So when Bruno Fernandes cut the lines and just presses on his own, he leaves the midfield open, and Greenwood follows him. Greenwood follows Fernandes. So those two just opened up our shape for the opposition. But the problem is, okay, you made a mistake, no problem. Players make mistakes. The problem is, and I think this is what he referenced by their cheating, is that when they do that, they don't get back. So basically, they put us in the shit and they leave us in the shit dealing with it on our own. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I think that's the comment by they're cheating. They press, it's not successful, they just stay there, and the defense has to deal with it on their own and their double pivots. And that was our biggest issue. That what caused us the awful run of games under Ollie at the very end. Tying into that, though, the thing is, there is this conception that, like, the managers at the very highest level, change the habits of players that they buy. Unless the player is under the age of 20, 21, maximum 22, they don't really change their habits. Like, this was something that I really wanted Ollie to work on back in last season. I was like, he needs to work on some certain habits for some certain players. Like, for example, Rashford and his tracking back, Greenwood and his tracking back. These are just not cultivated in them. as players. You know, they have their qualities, but there are certain things that makes the player's game well-rounded, right? But the thing is, managers at the very highest levels don't have time to work with you one-on-one, or neither are even some of the coaches. The player has to be willing himself, you know. There's obviously the training sessions that are normal that they have to do as a team and as a group. So when you say, can Ranić put them in a way so that the transition between him and Ten Hag is easier? It's very difficult when the profiles of the players are so different to Ten Hag's style of play, because he has to change some massive habits in some of the players. Like, for example, someone like Rashford. I'm not saying Rashford can't play under Ten Hag. He probably can. But the thing is, there are certain things in what Ten Hag asks for, Rashford does not do at all. So he has to cultivate this new habit all on his own, you know? So, and for someone like Ten Hag at the elite level, he wants to win. He can't afford to start losing games because Rashford isn't developing his habit. He'll drop Rashford, you know, and he'll look for a player that can fulfill the things that he needs. And obviously this stems to other players too. I just used Rashford as an example. So he can put us in a 4-3-3 like Ten Hag plays, but the question would be, how many of these players actually fit the current style that Ten Hag plays right now? And the answer is very little.
Yeah.
I would say maximum 5 out of the 25 player squad. Like, fit him right now in the way that he plays right now. That's why I don't suspect that Ten Hag, when he comes in, will play the same exact style that he played at Ajax. He will change it according to the squad that he's been given, and then he will start to plug in things to eventually reach what he wants to play at the end. And you'd have to give him a lot of patience for that.
I really think there's a big reckoning coming with Rashford, because if you go back to Mourinho's time, there's a reason why Mourinho wanted Perisic, right? And if you remember how deep Mourinho was playing Rashford, and you remember how deep he was playing United's white players, because he didn't trust them getting back for this very reason. And it was one of the biggest criticisms was, you know, Rashford is playing way too deep under Mourinho. But again, he also had problems with the fullbacks for partly this reason. You know, we're talking about the very lowest bar here with United players. I mean, if you listen to some things with Ranić, what is he asking for? He's asking for players to play like they're happy to even play for Manchester United. They learn from Malanga, play with a smile on their face. You're talking about Cavani, who's always fit for Uruguay, never fit for United. You're talking about Jesse Lingard and Anthony Martial, both of whom were accused by the manager of not wanting to play, right? One of whom is gone and one of whom is desperate to go. We're at the very lowest bar. And what we have to look at, guys, is how United players are incentivized. Someone mentioned there, other players have big clubs, or other clubs have big egos with big clubs, but those are playing for football clubs. Those are playing at football clubs where the consequence for failure, right? If you aren't successful, you get kicked out. But at United, there's another metric that keeps you there. If you're commercially successful, you stay, right? Or if the cost to replace you is higher. See, City can afford to get it wrong. PSG can afford to get it wrong. If the money it doesn't work, they get it wrong. The other problem is they buy a player, they keep him there, right? It's exactly the same thing happens with a manager, right? So Moyes was sacked after 8 months because he wasn't Woodward's choice, right? But every manager after that was given too long. If you could argue that, you could argue Van Gaal was given too long because Woodward didn't want to admit he made a mistake. Exactly the same with Mourinho after he got the contract renewal. Solskjaer could have been sacked multiple times. Because Woodward again didn't want to admit he made a mistake because it reflects poorly on him. And so I assume this is why Richard Arnold is probably paralyzed by analysis with them looking at Ten Hag and everything else. And I've said this a week ago. I said I hope that they're interviewing United as much as United are interviewing them, because it's imperative they get the conditions to be successful. And for me, I think Ranić is in a situation where he's also advertising for his next job. So if he has a catastrophe between now and the end of the season, his reputation as a potential manager for someone else is destroyed, right? But if he has a really successful next few months, then Ranić will walk into another job. So this is an important couple of months for him. So I don't think he's going to sacrifice his potential, his reputation to bleed young United players through. And let's be honest, this consultancy role, my 3-year-old's a consultant in my house. It doesn't mean I ain't well, listen to it, right? So it's irrelevant. But I think with Rashford, truthfully, he would rather be a central striker where he doesn't have to do that, getting back, but he's not consistent enough. He's not good enough. He doesn't take enough chances to take that role. And I think United have a big decision to make over him.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think the thing is with this ties back to the earlier point I said, which is United have the problem with profiling players for what they want to do. So, for example, Greenwood and Rashford, we're playing them out on the wide when neither of them is really a wide player, right? Like Rashford is in between. I've said it so many times. He's in between a winger and a center forward. He's an inside forward, kind of like just a general forward, really. Like you can't classify him as a winger and you can't really classify him as a center forward. Right, so the things that he does best, he does when he has a player that can link up with him. And I remember, Stu, we talked about the Andy Cole and Dwight York comparison a long time before. He needs that. That's why Rashford performed a lot better when Martial was on the field in a central area, because Martial is the type of player that isn't a striker-minded, selfish way. He's just the guy that will link up some play and then, vacates some areas to give you space for you to run. And Rashford struggles with tight areas. So when he plays with Martial, he makes space for Rashford, so Rashford actually can exploit that space. But if you take Martial out of the equation and leave Rashford alone, then he's against a low block and Rashford doesn't know what to do. And then he starts making all the bad decisions and we get frustrated with him, because he's not that type of player. He's not the player that exploits space and moves and break down low blocks. He's not that. And similarly with Greenwood, I don't think we were like ruining him or anything, but like we were playing him out wide and he wasn't honing or developing his qualities in the central midfield. And this stems to what? Misprofiling by the club or the managers, or whoever you want to blame it on. But I say it's because it's a long existing issue with the club, no matter who the manager was. I say it's the club for in general, So these players, when you misprofile them and then add them all together because they're good names and like Phil was saying, it's a popularity contest. Of course, they're not going to play well. Of course, they're going to look like a bunch of individuals on the field who don't know what to do, and you're just relying on someone to make a 50-yard pass so someone can latch on the end of it and score a goal, So, and that's essentially my biggest issue and worry with United. And I was hoping the consultancy role would be more than just the talk, because I believe Ranier can actually do some really good work if he's more hands-on, because he built clubs before. But apparently it's not. It's just a person who's sitting there just for the fans to appease them,
Just a quick caveat on that. Imagine you're Ten Hag and you come in and you've got John Murda, you've got Darren Fletcher, you've got Ralph Rangnick, and you've got Richard Arnold all above you making decisions. How can any manager be successful in that environment? It's impossible.
Well, the problem you've got is, and look, I've got to ask you.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. Yeah. I just want to say this one point quickly before I forget it, because I know I will. Phil was saying that other clubs can afford to make mistakes. We can't. So when one of our managers gets sacked, we all look at his signings as like, oh, he ruined us by getting all these wrong players, and then the next one comes in and he brings the players and then he ruined us because he got these players. No, it's the club who does that. And for example, I looked this up for a while now. Maguire, Bruno Fernandes, probably Aaron Wan-Bissaka. These three, we would have bought them whether Solskjaer was here or not. Yeah. And probably the only one that you can say that was Solskjaer's pick between him and Giggs was Daniel James. The other three, we would have bought them. I'm 100% sure United as a club would have bought these players, whether the manager was Oli, was Ten Hag, Pochettino, whoever it was, because they were linked with us a year ahead of Solskjaer, all three of them.
Well, I would certainly like to get an answer who bought Van de Beek.
Yeah,
that too. Who bought Van de Beek? That too. So when you say these are Oli signings, I really don't think they're Oli signings. Neither were Mourinho's players were his players. Neither were Van Gaal's players were Van Gaal really made a scene out of it in one of the press conferences, saying I wanted these players and they didn't get me these players and all that stuff.
Look, all I would say is, and I get Beatty points about about how players fit in, etc., etc. But this is the problem with the modern day player. This is the issue with the modern day player and his mentality. I can't do that. I was never taught to do that, or I don't want to do that. Where is your pride of being a professional footballer anymore? Where's your pride of being a human being, pulling on the shirt of Manchester United? This is what we don't have. And this is why a lot of fans can't grasp it, and a lot of players can't grasp it, because we've all been in environments, either when you've been playing football or you've been at work, and people are saying, let's look at this, let's look at this. Where is the mentality of the modern day footballer, or Manchester United footballers, that they can do it, or they want to learn, or they want to try? We don't. Most of our squad can't be bothered. They're not interested in trying certain things. And this is what annoys me with the modern day player. It absolutely grinds my gears more than anything. But when you go to look at Athletic Madrid the other day, their right back, was scoring goals at Anfield a couple of years ago in midfield as an attacking midfield player. But he's he wasn't getting in, so he's looked at his position within the squad and what can I do to help the squad? So he's gone and started playing right back, and he was outstanding against us. That's one very, very small piece in a rather large Athletic Madrid team. But that's the type of influence his teammates has had on him, and the type of influence the manager's had on him, and the type of influence, actually, in Phil, you're right, the club has had on him. And that's just one player. And we've got loads of players that haven't quite grasped or looked at the bigger picture and thought, what can I do to affect the starting 11 at Manchester United? Where's that gone? Where is all that?
I would have to say, mate, if I could, Abdel, just say something. I would actually go back to Abdel's point on this and say that what they're at, it's very difficult to change players and what their strengths are. And you play to your players' strengths, right? I mean, if I start sticking Harry Kane out the top of midfield, maybe he'll do it, but he's good enough to where I expect to play in my strongest position every week. That's what I was bought for. So, if you look at someone like Pogba, what did Pogba say the other day? I don't even have a role. We're sitting here 4.5 years in and we don't know what his best position is. He was stuck on the left, put square pegs in round holes, just to get him in the team, because we were still asking, can him and Fernandes play in the same midfield? And so to me, I think if you look at what made Klopp successful at Liverpool, he bought specialist players for specialist positions, right? Didn't care about reputation. These players are going to do a job for me in this particular position. That's their best position. So I sympathize some sense with United players where, if you're being asked to play a position or play a particular role that you weren't bought to play for and it's not to your strengths, you'll do it for a while, but eventually, when you're a top-level player, you're not going to put up with that. And United shouldn't be asking players to do that. They should be buying players for those particular roles so that that's the best. I mean, there's only one question you ask about, if I need a left back, do I have the best left back in world football or best young kid in world football in my academy? No. Okay, if you're Manchester United, you need to go out and get that player. Right? Instead of saying, here, Victor Lindelof, you go play left back. Because top teams will beat you whenever you're doing that. And I think that's maybe, let's United have spent $1 billion. How many of those players have been successful?
Well,
right?
That's it, innit?
So there's clearly something very wrong with the football club structurally, that every professional they bring in wants to leave shortly after. I mean, what does Sanchez say? Want to leave after the first week? I mean, I know, I understand the criticism, but someone's got to ask why. Someone's got to ask, why do all these players desperate to leave?
He said it didn't feel like we were a team. We were a bunch of individuals.
That's important, lads.
And it's still relevant to this day. We're a bunch of individuals, not a team. And that's a worrying sign. That's a very big worrying sign right now. And like on Stu's point about like taking ownership and stuff like that. Thing is, Stu, right now it's even much harder because every team is more tactically aware than it was before. Spaces aren't given to you as much as it was done before back in the early noughties, the 90s. Spaces are now closed off. It's very tight. It's very tactical. You have to break people down in certain ways by certain movements. So those idea of the player has to take charge of a game on his own, one player out of the entire team, it's very difficult to happen. Sure, some players can have an influence, bigger influence, but because they provided the killer pass or provided the finish. But again, if you analyze those things and why was he able to provide the killer pass. Like if we take, for example, Kevin De Bruyne, when he played against us, man of the match performance, he was the most influential player on the pitch. But why? Why was he? It's not because Kevin De Bruyne in that instance became the best player in the world. It's because everybody around him functioned well and gave him the space to operate and show his qualities, you know. But for example, if City was playing badly, to expect Kevin De Bruyne to just out of nowhere carry his own team on his own to beat United, if United was playing as a team, it's a very high bar to set for players at the moment, because it's not, the football is not played the same way now. It's just not the same way. Like, you get shut down quickly. They know your qualities. They've analyzed you. They know how they can get you, what your weaknesses are. So I get you. I get your sentiment, and I share it. I want people who want to fight more, say, you know what, I'm not gonna get beat and stuff like that. But it's a hard ask in a team game. It is a very hard ask in a team game.
But I accept your point, though, mate. I mean, there is some of it frustrating where you're like, I want you to care as much as I do. That's all I ask of a footballer. I don't care about your form. I don't care that you're not good enough. I want you to show that you care, that there's about 30,000 people in that stadium that have given up so much to be there, financially and otherwise. Just show me you care. And again, the Everton fans, and they're saying the same thing, but we're talking about the league where team is just off the bottom three have spent almost $1 billion. That's how good you need to be. Villa have money, Everton have money. So many teams now have money that you don't have to see. You have to be exceptional in every department to win.
Yeah, exactly. It's a team. Unfortunately, it is a team game. Like we have to be. Actually, right now at the highest level, they even worry about how the throw-ins are taken to gain an advantage from that.
Exactly.
So how can I get an advantage out of a throw-in? So that's the minor details that they're looking at, the 1%. So we're here talking about just show some aggression. So we're still at the very basic level.
Yeah, exactly. Show it you're happy. Show it you care. It's so sad to me.
Yeah.
Concerning, isn't it? Well, listen, we have to cut it short in about 8 minutes or so, because Stu's got to get off because he's a diva on these shows. But while you're here, Phil, it's not every day we get to speak to a top journalist like yourself. So, we've got to discuss these Ten Hag rumours. Obviously, we've been discussing how players might fit under his system, but there's a lot of news coming out saying that a move is closer than maybe a lot of us think. So, what information have you had on it in the recent days? Because it really has accelerated, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, I commented on this a week ago. Jonathan Schrager also commented on it that both Ten Hag and Pochettino were the favourites, and they were the ones that I would be surprised if it wasn't them. I think probably what's happened in the last week for Pochettino is the problems that exist at PSG are so consistent, are so reminiscent of what you see at United. I don't think it's helped them. I think United, like obviously both Ten Hag and Pochettino, there are obviously other managers in consideration, but at this point, I would be very surprised if it wasn't Ten Hag. That decision hasn't been made. United are analysing things very, very closely, obviously, and it's an exhaustive process, very forensic. Some could even say too much, but I think United are so afraid of getting this wrong that they're analysing every major detail. I think, obviously, like we talked about before, if you look about Van Gaal, when Van Gaal got the job, United were essentially operating on his recommendations months before he took the job because he had the World Cup. This is going to have to be something similar. What they're going to do here with either Van Gaal or Pochettino is going to have to move on those targets. I was speaking to a French journalist before I did this podcast on Pochettino, and the PSG fans are upset with Pochettino, who feel they're primarily upset with Nasser Khalifa and also, of course, Leonardo. But when they look at Pochettino, they also feel that he hasn't done enough to unite that dressing room. And when you look at the problems that exist at PSG, swap PSG for Manchester United, and at Manchester United, it's harder. I mean, even with those problems, PSG are still getting the Champions League finals, right? I mean, what would we give for a dressing room that's in tatters getting the Champions League finals? I mean, And so and he's in a league where he has so much an advantage over the rest of the other teams. I'm going to ask someone to tell me what makes Mauricio Pochettino a Manchester United manager, because I'm telling you that Avram Grant got the Champions League final, which is Pochettino's crowning achievement, other than a trophy to champions in France. So, his record against the top six is really poor at Spurs. And sitting here going, well, what is it? And I think when I ask myself, what is it that attracts United to him? And I honestly feel it's for all the wrong reasons. I honestly feel that it's what attracts him to United is that he's a nice guy. He will go with the flow. People need to ask United, need a coach or a manager, because I think he's a coach, right? And I also feel that they backed away from people like Conte. If you look at Conte in his Inter Milan, look at his press conferences, very direct about the players that they needed, about holding them to a certain standard. Look at what he did at Spurs, but petrify United, right? So again, the football club's being run based on what's right for the people running it, not what's right for the football club. This is also, I think, what they like about Ten Hag, is he's not someone that's going to come out and, although the Dutch are a little bit more direct, I think that will be a key factor in how they find him, and how they, if Spurs didn't hire him because they didn't feel that he needed a specific type of structure to be successful. United don't have structure, and so I think they'll probably end up going with Ten Hag because they think they can get him a little sooner. I think PSG aren't going to sack Pochettino till the end of the season at least. I think it'll be Ten Hag, but at this point, that decision's not made.
Well, I'll just stick with you, Phil, because obviously you mentioned something a couple of days ago about, it's all well and good United interviewing Ten Hag, but there should be as much of an interview on Ten Hag for United. So, do you want to just explain sort of what you meant by that?
So obviously he's well aware of the problems that exist at Manchester United. I mean, he's going to have heard them from Van de Beek. He's going to have heard them from other players that played there that he's familiar with, same with Pochettino. And neither of them were in a position where if they had a terrible tenure at Manchester United, they'd walk away with the reputation intact, right? Because there's still two managers with something to prove. Ten Hag has done a decent job in the Dutch Eredivisie, but that's not enough, right? So both of them have to pick their move really carefully. So for Pochettino and Ten Hag, at this moment in time, their stock is high enough where they could get a top job somewhere else, but not if they fail at Manchester United. So they have to be really careful about the move they make, because like I just said, with the £1 billion that we spent, how many people go to Manchester United and leave with the reputation enhanced? Very, very few. And so for them, these are wealthy guys. They don't do it for the money. They've got other opportunities elsewhere. So for them, they all have to be very, very careful and make sure they get commitments from Manchester United to give them an environment where they can be successful. Richard Arnold turned around and said something that I found astonishing, and I got overlooked, where he said, we need to provide a professional environment. That's the bare minimum. You're the second most senior employee at this football club. How on earth have you not been able to provide a professional environment in 9 years? That is absolutely astonishing. So what you're telling me is that the way you've been running this football club for 9 years is completely wrong, which is a good admission and a good start, because that's when you start to earn my trust and confidence, right? So to me, I think what we talked about before this podcast starts, the first thing United have to do is recognize and learn from their mistakes. But in order to do that, you have to know what the mistake is. And I still don't think you need to know what their mistake is. When I listen to the stuff that they're doing, there's still a massive sense of lack of self-awareness that you're also part of the problem.
Absolutely. I'll quickly open the floor to Stu or Abdul to jump in on that, and then we'll call it a day if you guys want to give your thoughts.
I'll just jump in quickly because I'm going to have to shoot in a minute. I'm with Phil on Pochettino. I've been asking the same questions. I like Ten Hag because I like the way that he plays. He's very, very fluid. He plays the pendulum effect, which I was speaking about the other night. They attack nicely together as a group and they defend nicely as a group. So he seems to have a solid way of playing, but it all goes back to what we were saying previously. If you don't have those types of players that can play how he wants, then it's going to be very, very difficult. So, but I'm going to have to shoot, boys, I'm afraid. Phil, good to see you again.
Yes, man, all the best. Cheers, Stu.
No worries.
See you again, Abdel.
we'll wrap it up anyway. Massive
Okay,
thank you
wait
to
till you wrap it up
you
then.
guys for massive thank you to you guys for joining me. Always appreciated. Stu, Abdul, Phil, especially appreciate your time. Same goes to same goes to everyone who tuned in, got comments in. As always, massively helps us. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Obviously, no United game this week, but stick with the channel. We'll have plenty of brilliant content, a lot of content about the women's team, which I think a lot of you will find really interesting. We're going to put a real spotlight on them. So stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe for more, and we will see you next time.